All right, welcome. We're so glad you've joined us tonight. We're excited to talk about Aether Ones with author Wendi Coffman-Porter. If you have questions for Wendy, please post them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the program. So let me start by introducing Wendy. She grew up as an only child in a military family and spent a lot of time inventing new friends and sharing them with others. Her passion has always been the colorful canvas and creative freedom of fantasy and sci-fi. Be it role playing or writing in her office at home in Texas with her pack of furry friends, she is always developing something new and colorful to share with others. So, welcome, Wendy. Would you like to start by telling us a little bit about yourself, the book, and maybe reading a short passage?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name's Wendy, as we've all covered. um, I've been writing, I would say, most of my life. Most of the life where you actually write. And I started writing for others in about fourth grade, give or take. I used to take books that I would read and I would adapt them to one or two person plays. And as English credit, I was able to act those plays out for the kindergarten classes. It was just one of those things I really enjoyed doing. My English teacher loved it. I got credit for it. I ran with it. After that, I mostly wrote for myself and occasionally other people. By high school, I was writing, scripts for TV shows that we all love and watch. By the time my kids were born in 96 and 2000, I had written a full novel and started a second one, neither of which have been published or probably will be published. They're pretty bad. But after that, I decided to go to college. I got my bachelor's degree in creative writing, which really expanded my writing. I started doing things only because the classes required it, but doing things like poetry, short stories, stuff like that, stuff I really hadn't really paid much attention to before. And now, while I don't write much poetry anymore, I write a ton of short stories. I love short stories. But that's pretty much all about me. Aether Ones, which you can't really see, is a science fiction novel set in a universe that kind of merges science fiction and fantasy into one genre. Being that both of them are a technology. Instead of having your spellcasters that run around on horses with pointy hats, they've adapted that technology into, or they have adapted magic into actual technological things. Computers, ships, portal systems, that type of thing, gates. And in this particular story, our main character starts out, and this is a tad bit of a spoiler, but you get over it pretty quickly. But the character starts out undercover, and eventually, when she realizes that what she was doing actually is part of her jurisdiction and starts a full-fledged investigation into what's going on, you really begin to see how the two universes work together. And in the little snippet I chose, I'm actually going to cover why the two universes are separate. So instead of being the same universe. So I suppose we should cover that now, which requires glasses. Hold on one second. So, the main character's name is Leilani Falcone, by the way. Leilani made her way through the ship to the transport hub. As she strolled along the P-ways, she thought back to her first lectures in Eldrilin theory at Eldritch Line University many decades ago. In the beginning, Professor Eagleton had been pacing in front of the class, slowly rolling the digital pointer between his fingers. As many of my counterparts in Kaldane space like to say, there was a big bang. We, however, simply call it the Great Sundering. Either way, there was a massive explosion. During that explosion, the entire universe was torn into two distinct realms. One we call Kaldane, and the other we call Aether. The weave of Eldritch that ties all life together was ripped from Kaldane space, and each planet was duplicated or ghosted, depending on how you think of it, each now existing in both planes. He tapped a crystal on the desk, and a massive illusory hologram replayed the Great Sundering that had erupted over the lecture hall. Hundreds of first-year students oohed and awed. The universe was copied in every detail, save two. The image had shifted to show massive lines of power crackling and sparkling as they connected several planets in an eerie weave. The first, only Aether reality, still has Eldritch lines, or Eldrilins as we call them, tying each living planet together. The image shifted again to show an immense ruined city of buildings that looked like they had once reached the lower atmosphere. It was now mostly overgrown rubble. The second, only the planets that remained in the Aether still have ruins of ancient civilizations associated with the cataclysm. So I'm not going to keep reading because if I do, it'll spoil way too much of the story. But it explains how the two realms exist, both together and apart. And Kaldane society is run by an emperor in this particular area. And the emperor has a law in place that prevents Kaldane citizens from knowing that Aether space exists. Therein lies Agent Leilani Falcone's job to ensure that the Aether individuals that do come into Kaldane space follow the laws. So there we go. I think that's covers enough of it. Sorry.
No. So can you talk about your passion for writing science fiction and fantasy? What about it makes it your preference?
So that's interesting. I think that probably goes back to my childhood. You know, when you're an only child, I grew up in Athens, Greece, or Fairbanks, Alaska. We kind of bounce back and forth between those two locations. And in Athens, I didn't really speak the language. We didn't live on a military base, so there weren't really English-speaking people around me necessarily. And in Alaska, it was a long distance between people. So I spent a lot of time alone. And I think I got to the point where inventing people was more fun and more interesting than real people. I guess is really honestly the best way to word it. And as I got older, I became fascinated with how different America and the different places in America I had been were from Athens. And I became incredibly curious about cultures and sociological differences and stuff like that. And so the more I delved into my fantastical realities, the more I found this really amazing canvas where I could define truly unique cultures and in my mind explore how that culture might interact with another culture. And I became truly just fascinated with how that worked in my head. And so the more cultures I invented, the larger the cities got, then the larger the planet got, then the larger the solar system got, then the larger the galaxy got, and then, entire universes, to where I ended up developing entire multi-megaverses where there were multiple threads of universes on top of each other. And I started just It became like this extreme fascination to explore how those would evolve. And it became almost a borderline addiction. I had to know more. I had to know how this worked. I had to know how it would adapt and grow. And then I would go back in time to a fantastical setting, and then I'd go forward in time to a science fiction setting. And in reality, that's what Aether Ones is I took my trilogy, which is actually a fantasy series that I wrote, and I moved it forward in time. And I said, what would happen if? And then Aether Ones was born, and then the second book in that series as well. But and it's just, to me, it's the exploration, I guess, is the best way to word it. I know what happened in history. That there's no exploration to that. So, I mean, it's just, in a new place, there's so much to still learn and understand. I really enjoy that aspect.
So that kind of leads me into my next question about world building. So world building is always an important part of any science fiction or fantasy book. Can you talk about how that process works for you?
World building. I'm trying to think that one through. Ironically, I suppose it depends on what I'm writing. So, for example, Aether Ones. The world building there, like I said, was built on the fantasy world. And ironically, that started out as an idea that I had as a game master. I said, I want to build a brand new fantasy world. I want to put my players in it and see what happens. And in the process of doing that, I started, inventing new races. And when I did that, I started with what I thought a fantasy-based world would start out as. And a fantasy-based world, in my psychosis, would start out as the elements, literally, just pure elements. And they would get together, they would create a planet, the planet would grow, the planet would adapt, the planet would attract life, as water tends to do. And then I said, okay, well, after they do that, then what happens? And then it was, then what happens? Then what happens? Then what happens? And so I developed these greater races and these lesser races, and then humans. And humans being the most prolific of all the races to begin with, and the most adaptive, they quickly covered the planet. But it took a long time for that to happen. But in my head, I just jotted down notes. I started with the elements. Okay, here's what the elements would do. Then I jotted down the notes. Here's what the older races would do. Here's what the dragons would do. Here, and so on and so forth. And it grew into something much larger than I expected it to be. And the next thing I knew, I was writing stories in it, and the story turned into a full novel. Then it turned into a second novel, then a third novel. And the first novel was self-published, but the second and third haven't been. And eventually I'd like to republish the whole trilogy as a set through a regular publisher, but because it really needs editing. But the world building for me in that circumstance was the idea that I could run it for somebody. But in the case of like the short stories that I'm currently working on, that's actually driven by my husband's world. I made a character for my husband. My husband runs a game for myself and my friends, and I made a character for that. And I started writing short stories about that character that turned out to be much more in depth than I ever expected it to be. I thought it would be one short story, and now I'm up to 9 or 10 or something like that. And I've got like 15 more in the works, but so and a possible novel out of that as well. But so it I guess in reality, in both cases, they came back to gaming, just from different different angles. You know, one from a game mastering angle and another from a player angle. But all of my world building is driven by base elements. I start with what created the world, and I move up. Try to develop some sort of history timeline.
So we have a question from an audience member that kind of builds into this as well. And the question is, I'm curious about influences. The first part of the book felt like Heinlein, for example. So are there other writers that kind of influence some of that as well? Or is it really just from your gaming background?
Yes and no. So I don't think I've ever actually read Heinlein, so I can honestly say I don't know that one. But my husband has, and he is a huge fan of it. So it is entirely possible that there might be some Heinlein in there that I'm not aware of. You know, because my husband and I have been together for almost, wow. We've been together for 20 years now. But and so just under 20 years. But and so it kind of all blurs, you know. I was very early on. I was extremely driven by writers like David Weber, and stuff like that. The Honor Harrington series was a very formidable just collection of character building for me. And I really loved his character building. Elizabeth Moon also, I really enjoyed her characters. And so in those circumstances, those types of writers taught me to develop a really well fleshed out character, where I necessarily originally just wrote in a world, and the characters were kind of like a byproduct of that, because I was more interested in the sociological aspects of it. But as I got into my undergraduate and my graduate work, where I was doing some psychology work, I got into really trying to ensure that the characters were very heavily realistic. I wanted them to be real people. None of them are superheroes. They are all fallible. They are all, you know, have had horrible things happen to them in their lives. They've had great things happen to them in their lives. But for the most part, they're very driven people. And I like to think that the role playing, as well as video games, as well as the writers that I've written in the past, really make a difference.
So what comes first for you? It sounds like maybe this is kind of flipped some, but maybe you can kind of elaborate a little more. Is it the world building? Is it character? Is it plot? Kind of how does that all sort of work its way out for you?
You're right. It's flipped. When I first started, it was all world building. I really didn't care about the characters at all. I will be completely honest. For me, it wasn't about the characters. It was about the sociological interactions and the cultures and that kind of stuff. But as I've gotten older, and as I've had more trauma, I suppose, in my own life, I have grown into writing characters that people can associate with. You know, almost there's very few people in the world who've had an absolutely wonderful life their whole life, and they're just super ecstatic about everything that's ever happened to them. And those people need to be slapped, but that's just beside the point. So I'm just kidding. I sort of, but you know, the thing is the rest of us have had some pretty awful things happen to us. And in my case specifically, you know, by becoming sick later on in life, I developed these traumatic things that have happened to me that drive me to write characters that learn how to overcome traumatic events, and how they cope and how they deal and how they move forward, even with those traumatic events in their past. And while that is the case with Leilani, it's not as obvious in Leilani's story as it is in like the Shade Chronicles that I'm writing. But it is still one of those circumstances. So but yeah, I agree. It has flipped, and to be completely honest, I hadn't realized until I said it out loud to you that it had flipped. But it is. It's totally flipped. I'm far more interested in the characters now than I ever was before.
How does creating your world and kind of the rules about what happens and your characters, how do those play off one another?
So, technically speaking, Aether Ones is my first sci-fi. And while in my fantasy stuff, developing fantastical things where people just cast spells and you move on, that's a heck of a lot easier than like developing a technology in such a manner that my husband's best friend, who is literally a nuclear engineer, can say, okay, that's plausible. And every once in a while, I literally will send him something and go, is this plausible? And then he'll send it back to me and go, yeah, that's plausible. And occasionally he'll say, no, not really. But this was so much harder. I will admit this was a lot harder. And I think that because I had to work so much harder at world building for this and the follow-on investigation that Leilani's doing. She's doing a second investigation, not related to the first one necessarily. But because of that, I think it probably shaped her more than I expected it to. Because the technology, because she's a science fiction character with cyberware, although it's called mageware in this circumstance, but with a science fiction character with mageware, she is driven by certain aspects of the technology, and her reactions are 100% related to that technology, and so it drove her aspect far more than I expected it to. It was a good educational process.
So you just talked about running things by a scientist friend. Do you think it's important in sci-fi that the science really works, or do you think it doesn't actually matter?
So let me put this to you as my personal experience. If I'm reading a science fiction novel and something is passed in front of me that does not even come close to our Newtonian understanding of physics, it throws me right out of the book. I mean, like literally just tosses me right out of the story, because my brain goes, wait, huh? And now I'm no longer following the story. And so while I don't feel that sci-fi needs to follow Newtonian physics exactly, not even close, because most sci-fi doesn't, it needs to be plausible enough that our mind skips over the argument, because we're all going to have the argument after the book. With someone who's read it, we're going to have that argument after the book. But if it's so out of the realm of possibility that it throws you out of the book, then yeah, it doesn't need to be in there. But again, that's just my personal opinion. So for me, and remember, I'm adding magic into this, which is obviously not plausible, but I cover magic as just a new type of energy source. It's eldritch rather than electric. And so the same type of technology with the right modifications can be run on eldritch technology, that would also be run on electromagnetic technology. And so I try really hard to try to make those things work, because I don't want to be tossed out of my own book with jarring realities, let alone have somebody else be tossed out of the book with jarring realities. So so yeah, I feel it's at least a little important.
I want to so you talked about writing the novels and writing short stories. What is different about that process?
Instant gratification. It's really all I can say. You know, I can crank out 10,000 words in a day. And so for me, the short stories, keeping them under 10,000 words, or actually they're all kind of right at 10,000 words, but keeping them around that allows me to knock them out in a day, 2 days tops, you know, with edits and stuff. And I have this instant gratification. The story is done. I can let it go and I can move on to something else. And I have found, and I've never, like I said, until recently, I'd never really been a huge short story writer. I mean, I write short stories, but it wasn't like my drive. Writing continuous stories was my drive. But I am finding that it is so much more gratifying, I guess is the best way to word it, even though I'm not getting paid for it. The books, however, though, have this fascinating feel. So actually grabbing a hold of something that you have created after 2 years worth of work does have an awful nice feel to it. You know, being able to set it on the bookshelf or hand it to someone else feels really good.
So talk about that 2-year process, because I think that's something that a lot of people really don't understand or know how long it really takes between you write that first draft and then you actually see it in, you know, with a cover and the artwork and everything's all done and ready to go.
That was a horrible process, I'd like to point out. Oh my God, that was awful. So I wrote the book, Aether Ones, in like 5 weeks, the whole novel. And then, you know, I spent who knows how long editing it. And it actually didn't get published for 2 more years. It sat on the shelf. And I finally found a publisher that loved it, and was interested in publishing it. And then this process started that I just, to be completely frank, I didn't even know existed. And I went, are you kidding me? And I'm still to this day saying, are you kidding me? But it is painfully slow. You know, I found a great editor. Erin was absolutely amazing. I totally loved her. The editing was painful, but not as bad as some authors have said. Because this was probably my 4th or 5th book, I understood the concept of continuity. So there wasn't any back and forth about the continuity of the story. There wasn't any back and forth about this character, you know, doesn't work right, or this, you know, doesn't. So I didn't have any of that. For me, it was mostly line editing and stop telling me she walks across the room. You know, that was the biggest thing. She said, if I see the word walk one more time, I am literally going to drive over to your house and throw this at you. So, and she's like 3 states away. But so yeah, there was a lot of back and forth about stop telling me and show me, which I can honestly say has only made me a better writer. It really has. It has made me a much better writer. I now have this little sensation in the back of my head whenever I write the word walk that makes me want to like cringe, because I can just feel her getting mad at me. So, you know, when I go through my own edits, I will literally pull the word. I do my best to ensure that word does not exist in anything I write. She does not walk across the room. She does not gesture. I define the gestures. I define what she's doing. So I forgot the question. Totally got sidetracked. So we were then there was the process of, you know, they had to like lay it out in book format. Yeah, okay, I get that. but did it really need to take 3 months? And then there was the process of okay, now it has to go to the printer. Okay, now you have to wait 6 months for it to get back to you from the printer. Yeah, okay. And remember, I'm doing this in 2020. Oh my God. I mean, it was horrifying. So now I can't talk to people. I can't go walk to people. The printer's closed for like 5 months because no one's allowed to go to work. And I mean, it was just, so it may not necessarily have needed to take as long as it did in my case, but it did take a year from start to finish, literally, for me to get this book from the editor or from the publisher saying we love it to getting it on the shelves. But I was actually really impressed with the fact that it went out immediately. As soon as it hit the warehouses, 1,000 copies were shipped all over the US. And it made it into Barnes and Nobles, which I was really shocked. First run, that's very rare. So I'm told. And I mean, it ended up everywhere. And I was really, really happy with it. I was going to go into my Barnes and Noble locally, but it didn't stay on the shelf long enough for me to do it. I was like, wait, no, I want to come in and say, I'll sign it for somebody, but it was already gone. So, I'd love to do a book signing at some point. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but
at some point there will be.
Hopefully we'll all be allowed to leave our homes again.
Yeah, at some point, yes. So somebody has asked, are your short stories published anywhere?
Yes, they are published on my website. They're totally free. Go have at them, enjoy. I have some of my older shorts up there, as well as the newer ones that I'm publishing, which are called the Shade Chronicles. And I honestly have to say I love the Shade Chronicles, partially because I love writing them. The technique is so unique. It's not anything I've ever read before, because it is literally, like we talked earlier, it is literally the readers, us, following along as a character reads a book that was written about her. And so you have the modern time in which she is, plus the historical time in which she's reading. And it was an ex-partner who wrote the books about her when she was put in prison. Cat burglar and all. But she was put in prison, and he felt the need to tell the entire galaxy about her story. And when she's finally paroled out of prison, it's 5,000 years later, everyone's dead, and the world's been bombed into oblivion. She's now stuck in, dealing with dinosaurs and people on horseback and piss pots being thrown out the window at her. And she's like, "Wah!" And she can't comprehend the idea that these people don't even understand what a bacteria is, let alone how to wash their hands. And she comes from a society that was all over the galaxy. Space travel was normal. You printed your food. You didn't worry about, killing an animal. Oh my gosh, who kills an animal for food? That kind of thing. And so you're dealing with this severe dynamic of what she's dealing with now, and then being reminded by these books what she dealt with before. And not only that, but the stories are about her crimes, literally. And she's like, seriously? Yeah, you had to tell them this story about how I stole this, as if it wasn't enough that I was already arrested for this, So, she's like, yeah, what could possibly go wrong with telling everybody? Yeah. So, and so that's something. And it's funny because I'm having so much fun with it. I truly, truly enjoy just writing the stories, because to me, it's just as fun to see what happens as it is for everybody else. Yeah, it is what it is.
So this kind of, talking about the short story and thinking about your novel, your characters are layered and complicated. And you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I kind of wanted to be a little bit more specific about it. Can you talk about why it's important to give your character's depth? So
I think 2020 is actually a really perfect example. I know that sounds weird, but 2020 is a perfect example. We don't read because we're trying to learn something, you know, unless we're going to college. I mean, if I'm going to college, then yeah, sure, I want to read a textbook. But I read because I need a break from reality. And you can need that break from reality for all kinds of different reasons. Either because your reality just sucks, or because you just want to see what somebody else does. And for me, not only is it a method of me to deal with the things that happen to me by building something like it through the character, but it helps me kind of feel like I'm talking to other people. I spend a lot of my time in my house, with my husband and 8 dogs. That's it. Literally. I see my friends on the weekends, and that's about it. So for me, it's a method of talking to other people. And when I do that, I love being able to share happy things, good things. I like being able to make people feel like they have somehow connected with me, learned something about me, learned something about the characters. Because sure, we can all read about the adventurer who gets up, goes out, has a great adventure, gets dirty, cuts himself, wins the day, runs off with the princess. But sometimes you don't necessarily feel like you have had any kind of connection with that character. And I really want my readers to read my work and feel like something about that character spoke to them. And so I try really hard to make my characters as human, and even though she's not human, neither one of them are human. But even though my characters aren't human necessarily, I want them to feel and have that human feel like that they're real people, that they have crappy lives and they just learn how to deal with it and move on. So, and if somebody can learn something from that, great. If they don't, great. Who cares? So long as you've had a break from the reality, I really don't care.
So, question from the audience.
Go for it.
Do you have a situation, fantasy, or science fiction that you would love to write about if you ever had the opportunity? Something that someone else created.
Fan fictions. Don't we all love fan fictions? I mean, seriously. I would really love to I know this sounds really, really, really bizarre. I would really love to write a Star Wars story with no force. Isn't that weird?
Interesting.
I would love to write a Star Wars story about somebody who lives in the bowels of Coruscant and just finds a way to work himself up through the echelon to be useful and helpful to the planet, or whatever. But I think that would be a lot of fun. I would love to write, and I don't know enough about Star Wars to write in Star Wars, so don't ask me to. But because don't get me wrong, I am a huge fan of Star Wars, but if you'll notice, it's really specific to things like the Millennium Falcon. I am a huge Han Solo fan. But that's the part of the reason why I love Han Solo, is because he's not some, dumbass Jedi who is trying to change the world. He's just trying to survive from day to day. And I love that aspect about him. I like the fact that he has this tortured past and this, figuring out how to survive and cocky attitude. And I love that about him. So, and then, when I was in high school, I used to write Star Trek episodes. Star Trek Next Generation. I was a huge fan. And so I wrote like 10 Star Trek episodes that are like long since gone. I have no idea where they went, and I'm sure they weren't good to begin with because it was high school. But I really, really enjoyed Star Trek. I'm a big genre fan, not necessarily of the movies or the TV shows, but I'm a big fan of the genre.
Well, I have to say that we were kind of talking about this before, that my parents own and operate carnival rides. I spent a lot of time as a kid in the summers in the office watching television by myself when my parents worked. But every day at 6 o'clock, my dad would come in and he would take his dinner break and we would watch the original Star Trek.
Yep.
That was every day. And I think that kind of left a big impression on me because that was just something that, we did every day. So, and you've kind of already hinted to this, but the book seems to have left hints that there's more to the story. Are you working on a sequel or a series?
So I'm not, with the exception of my fantasy story, which is actually a full-blown trilogy from start to finish. I'm actually not a big fan of series. So I also will say that if you are writing about a single character, there will always be callbacks because their history is what makes them who they are. And so when it comes to the Leilani Falcone stories, my goal is to make them all based on some kind of investigation. So hers is a mystery. Hers are designed to be specific mysteries. She has to find the problem, figure out what the problem actually is, solve the problem, then move on. However, that being said, yes, the very last portion of the book, I do kind of hint that there is an overarching villain going on there. But he's not really in the book. And I'm not going to spoil book 2 whether or not he's in it. But I will say that Leilani does end up on a separate mission. She does not end up with the same partners, same team. She does end up with a new team. She does end up with because she's very much a solo type character. And there is even a brief outline of a third investigation. And are they all tied together? Yeah, because they have the same character. I mean, are they sequential? No, not at all. You can read them completely on their own. And they should be perfectly fine. Although, no, they should be perfectly fine. I'm sorry. I'm trying to recall what's going on in the. I'm a little more than 2/3 of the way through the second book. So, but like I said, I took a break in 2020 because it was such a horrifying year.
It was just crazy.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. All right. So, do we have Ed? I'm going to open it up again for questions from the audience. Go ahead and you can put those in the chat because we got about 10, 15 minutes left. I want to kind of go back and talk about using gaming and novelization. So kind of talk about how that was kind of your in to how you were gonna to write things.
So, like I said, I started writing when I was really young. At about 18, I got in with a group of individuals who, to be completely honest, I can't for the life of me remember what the name of the company was. And we started doing the convention circuit, gaming conventions. And I was helping them with some Star Trek stuff that they were doing as a game master. I was help running the game, and we were in a game in LA, or at a convention in LA, and somebody came up to me and begged me to run a White Wolf live action game, which is kind of like LARPing, live action role playing. And White Wolf is a vampire based game. And somebody asked me to run that game because I had been doing it at home for almost 3 years regularly every weekend. And I said, okay, didn't think anything of it. I went and grabbed the headsets that we were using for the gaming convention, picked a couple of assistant game masters, and I started telling a story. In the process of telling this story, I don't know, I was into it about 4 or 5 hours, and somebody comes up to me, and I realize that they've got like this little name tag, and it says hotel manager. And I went, uh-oh. And he comes up to me and he says, I understand that this is a gaming convention. I understand that there is plenty of different things going on. I understand that you guys are playing a game. I think it's wonderful. He says, however, could you do me a favor and try to keep your players from scaring the guests? And I remember getting on the radio and going, how many players are we up to? And one of the individuals who's actually managing the list of PCs and NPCs says 487. And I went, are you kidding me? And he was like, nope. And I went, all right, well, we got to stay away from this area, this area, this area. And so, you know, so I start managing all these people. And remember, I'm 19, you know, all of the co-GMs are in their 30s, you know, and I'm running this story, and I ran it until 6 o'clock the next morning. All night long, this game went on. And I had so many people begging me for, you know, continuing to run that I was like, yeah, okay, but we've only got like one more day the convention's over, you know? And I had to go back to work the next day, and I was super tired. By the time the next night rolled around, I was unconscious. So, I mean, I didn't have another game. But I got to the point where people were begging me to do it professionally. They were just asking me to run. I need a new story. I want a new story. And I genuinely enjoyed it, again, because I'm interacting with other people. And I got to the point where telling stories was so fun for me, but they became very episodic. And for a lot of role players out there who role play on a very regular basis, episodic stories are not what they're looking for. They're looking for continuous campaigns, which is not my speed. I don't do continuous campaigns well. I just get bored. Like, the story's done. I don't want to do it anymore. You know, and so I don't GM as much anymore because my current players do not have patience for episodic stories. But for me, I love it. I love making new characters. I love trying new stories out. I love every part about role playing. It is just, I don't care who's GMing. I don't care if I'm GMing. I don't care if somebody else is GMing. For me, I really enjoy creating the new character, creating the new story, and moving on. Sometimes I write about it. Sometimes I don't. So, but yeah, I have to admit, role playing has really shaped my writing immensely.
I love that. And it's something different from a lot of writers' stories. So I think that's really really interesting and kind of fun, and it kind of makes sense how you've dovetailed into writing science fiction and fantasy. So we have a question: conscious decision to use female versus male characters?
No, not really. I do what feels right. In the situations with with what I consider my character, which is usually the main character, it's going to always be female. I think I've only ever written 4 or 5 stories from a male perspective, and those were exploratory stories more than anything else. But as for the other characters, they're whatever feels right. You know, am I driven by any necessity to keep some sort of balance? No, not at all. There's no balance in the real world, and if people think there are, that's their problem, not mine.
All right. Do we have any other questions before we wrap it up this evening? Give it a couple seconds.
I don't mind. It's all good.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, and thanks to the audience as well. And if you would like, if you don't already have a copy and you would like to purchase a copy of the book, we have made arrangements with the doc in Fort Worth to have copies available for purchase. This is their contact information. You can order directly from their website. I'm not sure if she's open to regular hours yet or if she's still running some reduced hours. So I do know that if she's still running reduced hours, it's kind of hard to get her on the phone. So just kind of be aware of that. But we hope that you come back for some of our author visits. We have a great lineup, close to one a week between now and April. And so if to check those out, you can visit our website, fortworthlibrary.org, and check the calendar for information on upcoming events. And thank you, Wendy. This was great. And we hope everybody has a nice evening.